welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. It's good to be with you, listeners, again this week. Joining me, as always, is Scott Melson. Hello, sir.
What's up, man? Did anything happen this week? Anything go on down at the Capitol?
I mean, it's still going on. We are recording this just less than 2 hours. It's roughly 3 o'clock on Friday, and the legislature has to be done by 5. They're constitutionally obligated to be done by 5 o'clock, and they are still casting votes up there. So we are, in fact, they're in caucus right now, according to Quorum Call, that the Republicans are in caucus. The Democrats are on the floor waiting it out. I think they are trying to come to an agreement on which of the vetoes that the House passed, that the Senate will also pass, and which ones the Senate wants to pass and send to the House, but knowing the clock is ticking. We'll touch on the status of the legislative session a little bit later in this episode, but more so next week because it's still developing, and we have some important stuff to talk about this week.
Before we go too much further, I do think that it is very important we touch on the tragedy that happened in Texas this week. An extraordinary loss of life that happens all too often in our country that should be completely prevented, and it's not because of policy decisions that we have made and continue to keep making. It is awful, and I mean the phrase like thoughts and prayers sounds so completely empty, and like you want to say it because like it's true, but also, man, there's so much more we can and should do on this. I don't know. I think many of us thought that after Sandy Hook there would be increased movement on guns in this country, maybe after Vegas, maybe after every single time this happened. So certainly, yes, if you're a praying kind of person, if you're a good vibes kind of person, if you're a like send that good energy out into the universe kind of person, please do that for all the families that are missing their loved ones this week. But please also, whether it's calling your legislator or whether it's donating to groups like Moms Demand, whether it's marching or doing whatever you feel like you need to do in this moment to kind of try and make whatever sense out of it you can. I encourage you to do that, but I just felt like we needed to start there before we go anywhere else.
Gosh, it's just a big deal. I think we will try to put together an episode that goes a little more in depth into this issue over the summer, but man alive. Also, on a relative sad note as well, I want to acknowledge that Willa Johnson, who was the first Black woman to serve on the Oklahoma City Council, passed away last night in her sleep, according to her family. It just got announced a little while ago. She has always been a leader and a pillar of our community, and so it's even as we started recording, it's been so great to see so many people's stories chime in. Ben Felder did an interview with her and Nikki Nice and Carrie Bloomert a while back, and it was a really moving and like insightful interview. So I will try to link to that in the show notes if you haven't already heard it or read it. But certainly our thoughts are with her family as well. Okay. Now, we also have a guest with us today, Scott, and that guest is Tamya Cox-Touré. Many of you probably listeners know Tamya. She's the executive director of ACLU Oklahoma and also the co-chair of the Oklahoma Call for Reproductive Justice. And we're excited to have her here today to discuss the intricacies of what I've been referencing as the 4 total bans on abortion that the legislature passed this year, because they all have their own nuances. And so welcome to the show, Tamya.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yes, definitely sending light and love to Willa Johnson's family. She's meant so much to me and my family. She was really good friends with my father-in-law, so Tamya Cox-Touré. So, yep, it is sad to hear, but we are going to celebrate the life that she has lived and what she has done for folks here in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, it is always when people like Willa pass away and you start to hear how many lives they touched, like you realize that there are certain people who are woven into the fabric of our city, of our community, in ways that many of us did not fully appreciate or might not have even known. And so if you're listening to this and this is the first time you've heard of Willa Johnson's name, I really encourage you to do a little bit of Googling, right? And learn a little bit about the people who built this town that don't often have buildings or streets named after them, right? Like there's a lot of people that got us here. So Tamaya, there are 4 bills, and maybe we'll just kind of go in order if that makes sense to you to talk about them. I will read them off the numbers up front, and then we'll just go down. So they were House Bill 4327, Senate Bill 612, Senate Bill 1503, and Senate Bill 1555. They all do a little bit of damage in different ways. So let's start with House Bill 4327. How would you describe that bill? Do you have like is it possible to have a short summary of that bill?
I do. I think it's just really important to recognize that these are all part of the same ecosystem that we were seeing and expecting this session, specifically when we knew that the United States Supreme Court was going to hear the Mississippi 15-week ban case. We knew these type of bills were going to happen. So House Bill 4327 is a quote unquote total abortion ban that prevents any abortion after fertilization to occur in Oklahoma. There are some very limited exceptions to rape and incest. Typically, we just say rape because we say incest is rape. So if you do hear me say just rape, I do mean incest in that. And what is really important of 4327 is that it is out of the criminal realm, and these are strictly civil action lawsuits. So it's not that abortion is illegal or it will be criminalized. It is simply saying that if an abortion occurs, any person can bring a lawsuit against the provider or someone who has aided and abetted, whatever that means, a person getting that abortion. So 4327, we've been commonly thought of this as the Texas style total abortion ban.
And just to clarify, when you say any person, you mean any person, right? Anybody in the state can bring a lawsuit. Can multiple people do it? Like, let's say there was some terrible club of people who said, we're all going to sue every time together, and 30 of them all file a lawsuit on the same individual for the same occurrence. As far as we know, that's possible.
Anything's possible because this is such a new territory for folks, right? Like this is definitely, we've really been calling this like judicial gymnastics because it's such new territory that we don't know how it plays out, even though we've seen it recently with the Texas. And then when Texas filed and there's a similar lawsuit or law went into effect, we've seen what's happening. And what's happening is people really aren't going to. Texas is different because it has a 6-week ban, meaning providers can go up to 6 weeks. But because there's a total abortion ban, providers aren't performing. Therefore, this is only going to impact people who are helping others get an abortion, right? So this is not even going to be about providers. It's about if I think that you helped my neighbor down the street from when I was a kid get an abortion, then I can sue you. And that's wrong.
Well, and I think one thing, and Tamaya, jump in here if I am wrong, because it's entirely possible that I am. But Andy, it is important to note, it is actually not any person. It is any person can file a lawsuit except state officers or employees who are acting in the context of their state office or their, like, what they do for their state. And that's really important because that's the only way that this is constitutional, right? Supposedly, according to the Supreme Court, who determines all the things, right? The way that this works is that because it is not the government doing it as it's a private lawsuit, like that's the trick. Like that's how they get around this and make it constitutional, because it's not the Attorney General of Oklahoma, it's not the court clerk, it's not, the healthcare authority or whatever. It's a private citizen, and that's the kind of novel legal mechanism. So it is anybody can sue except the people who normally would bring this kind of lawsuit.
So Scott, so hypothetically, if it's Auntie in Arkansas who catches wind of an abortion procedure happening, they could call and report in Oklahoma and therefore get a doctor reprimanded or that person reprimanded. Is that?
That's a Tamya question. If somebody out of state could do this.
So I think that is what we're trying to figure out. I mean, typically because it's an Oklahoma law, it would have like jurisdiction would have to happen in Oklahoma. But Bailey, I think you're kind of right on, right? If Auntie hears that Niecy got an abortion, but Auntie's in Colorado, right? Or I mean, it's Arkansas. Auntie can just call one of her girlfriends in Oklahoma and say, hey, this happened. Like there doesn't have to be a connection, a relationship with who sues that person. They just simply get to sue. So I think you're very much right that it really opens up these very, not he said, she said type of things, but like very nebulous reasons as to how to essentially get paid $10,000. And I think that's what the fear is that they don't have to have a relationship. They don't have to even know the person who got the abortion. If they did, they don't even have to know necessarily like where they got the abortion. They just simply, anyone can bring up, it's the law. Like anyone can sue for any reason. And in order for me to defend myself, I have to go to court.
So this almost feels like intrusion of privacy too, right? Because would abortion in this case not be considered like medical procedure that would be covered under some type of, I know we talk about like HIPAA and other, privacy things, but does that not violate someone's privacy in this way?
Great question. And I think we saw that during the presentation of House Bill 4327 last week, because there is a rape and incest exception, right? So if for me, someone were to get an abortion through that exception, and you have to report, even though we know that 70% of sexual assaults go unreported, you have to report to fall under that exception. But if I have no reason to know that you were raped and you get the abortion and I sue, the only way that doctor or medical provider can defend themselves is by bringing in your medical records and that police report. And that seems extremely everything that we think about, small government should be about. Right? Like if the person that had the abortion does not want to consent and does not want to, they don't have any way that person has no way to defend themselves if it was a true act. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so that's a question I had that's kind of, I think that's related to Bailey's question. And this may be something we don't know yet, because as far as I know, none of these cases, certainly in Oklahoma, and I don't think in Texas, have been litigated yet. On whom does the burden of proof fall in this case, right? Or in these types of cases? Is it the plaintiff who is bringing the lawsuit saying person X had an abortion and I'm suing person Y because I think person Y helped her? Is the burden of proof on person Y to prove that they did not aid in the abortion, or is the burden of proof on the plaintiff to prove that they did?
Right. So that's a great question. So the person bringing the lawsuit or challenge essentially has to have a preponderance of evidence, right? It's a civil matter, so that kind of that level of evidence is not as high as like in criminal cases, but has to bring like clear and convincing evidence. But we don't know necessarily what that law does not provide, what all that has to entail. And I think that's part of the bigger issue, is that because the law is so poorly written with little guidance, is that it does not give notice to the defendant. We do have in this law about what the defendant can and cannot do, what is a preponderance of evidence. So we do see some type of evidentiary requirements or evidentiary guidance, I guess, in the law. But this is new ground for everyone. And I think that's so while the burden is on the person bringing the lawsuit, it's still on the defendant to have to prove their innocence. And then how do we get there without violating HIPAA rules, or not even HIPAA rules, violating the privacy of a patient?
Yeah. Gosh. All right. Well, let's move on and talk about the next bill, because we'll start seeing how everything is interwoven a bit more. So the next one we're going to talk about is Senate Bill 612. Tamya, what's your summary of this one?
Yeah. So Senate Bill 612 is actually a carryover bill that was it didn't die, but was actually from last session. And what we know, and you all know as well, is that it's rare that we see carryover bills. And we've never seen a carryover bill in abortion area, except for 612. 612 is a typical criminalization bill, simply saying that a person is, it will be a felony with, I think, a 10 year in jail, $100,000 fine if they performed an abortion. This is typically what we've seen. This is Senator Don bill. He's tried to push this type of bill. We were extremely surprised and completely caught off guard when this bill was actually heard in the House, because it did make it to the Senate last session, but it stalled in the House. And again, we know that this type of bill was one of the many of their attempt to kind of overturn Roe. And that's really it came out of nowhere, because the effective date on this bill was 2021. So they didn't even have time to change it to, a proper effective date. And so this bill will go into effect in August. And we'll kind of see. And House Bill 4327, the only thing I do want to kind of go back to is it had an emergency clause. And again, these are this bill and then 1503 we'll talk about. This is the first time we've seen emergency clauses, meaning as soon as the governor signs it, it goes into effect, that we've seen with abortion bills. Typically, they've been a November 1 effective date.
And that's important because it limits voters' ability to do a veto referendum, right? Like, you have to start a veto referendum within 30 days of the end of the legislative session. But if the law is already enacted, then you don't have that opportunity to prevent it from, because if you do a veto referendum signature collection drive, if you're successful, it just puts the bill on hold and for a while until it can go on the ballot and then be decided by the voters. And so with an emergency clause, you don't have that opportunity. Sneaky.
Right.
One question, Andy, if you've got it pulled up. So both for 612, and then we just did 1503, right?
4327.
4327. Okay. Yeah. What were the votes on those? What were the vote counts?
So on 4327, fourth reading was 73-16.
And how many members are in the House?
101.
101.
There was 11 who abstained.
Okay. And then how about the next one? Because weren't there a couple of these bills that like 30 people took their constitutional privilege and like didn't vote?
On 612, it was 70 yay, 14 nay, and 16 like abstentions.
Okay, I thought there was one or two where there was like there was a lot more of the caucus that declined. They didn't want to vote no on it, but they didn't want to show up and vote yes either.
Yeah, so on 1503, it was 68, 12, and 20 abstains. So
that's the one. That's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
And I will say with 1503, I loved it was more of a walkout. 1503 was, 1503 is the 6-week ban. So it is identical to the Texas law. Again, it would ban abortion after 6 weeks. They refer to it as a heartbeat. We don't refer to it as a heartbeat bill because it's cardiac activity is the medical term. Dr. Melson, you know better than anyone. So we kind of refer to that as like a 6-week ban. That bill it kind of came out of nowhere. It didn't come out of nowhere. It actually wasn't supposed to be heard. So many of you all know that the House does have some rules. And one of the rules is that when a bill is placed on the agenda or, going to be on the agenda, it typically takes it's a 48-hour waiting period, which is it's crazy to say waiting period when we're talking about abortion, but like 48 hours. So you have 24 hours for people to amend the bill, and then another 24 hours to amend the amendment. But because of the way a lot was going on, it was a deadline. It was heard on the third reading deadline that the bill wasn't even supposed to be heard. So I kind of go back to and recognize that this is, we're nonpartisan organization, but if there were just 10 more, 15 more pro-choice legislators, that bill never would have been heard because they would have been able to stop the rule suspension. And I think that sometimes we kind of forget about, like, when you have super majorities, regardless of the parties, you're able to kind of walk through and walk over, fundamental rights in a sense. 1503 is not heard if more pro-choice legislators, not that they had the majority, but were just elected, because then they could have not had the 2/3 majority to suspend rules. So that's a good point. Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry. I was gonna say the other day I had a call with someone that's a big independent voter proponent from another state, and it was our first time to talk. And he found out I was from Oklahoma, and he was like, "Oh yeah, Oklahoma. Well, you guys have Democrats just as a courtesy, right? Like they just get to show up, but they don't have any power." And I said, "That's right." He was, of course, sad that we don't have any independents that are currently in the state legislature either. But I was like, it's funny that people in other states know that about us as well, that it's such a super majority, and we're not the only state like that, but we are perhaps the most notable, at least right now, because of these laws that we're discussing. Well, let's move on to 1503 then.
Mm-hmm. So 1503, again, part of this ecosystem of criminalizing essentially criminalizing pregnancy. But with 1503 is very similar to 4327 in the sense that it did not, it allowed for the 6-week ban, but it's not criminal. It's all in the civil action part of it, similar to 4327. So again, if someone thought that an abortion was taking place after 6 weeks, they could potentially sue the provider or sue anyone aiding and abetting. 1503 does not, and did not have a rape exception. And I think it's really interesting for listeners to really kind of, if it's interesting, maybe not, but 4327 and 1503 are very much identical in the impact and the effect, but the language is so different, because 4327, they were very heavy on like the nullification, saying that you could not go to court and challenge the constitutionality, like that the state was not implementing this. They were very, very intentional, more so than in 1503, about the language. And I think that's the other part that we really have to talk about, is like this lack of access to courts.
Is it legal to even tell people they can't challenge something in court?
I don't think so. I mean, like, not like it's stopping us because we're challenging, but I think that
it wouldn't be the first time we've passed things that are not constitutional.
Exactly. But that's the mindset. And that's what I really, when we talk about, like, for me as abortion rights activists, when we talk about, this is not the end, this is just the beginning on rights that are going to be trampled on. But when we see this language and we normalize this language, that's the concern. If we're normalizing putting in Oklahoma state statute who can challenge, or who can bring a challenge, or when it's correct to bring a challenge, and we normalize that language, then we think we're going to put it in every other bill. And that is where I think, people on both sides of the aisle really can come together and say, this is too much and this is too far. And we have a responsibility and obligation as voters to say, no.
It feels like increasingly both the executive branch and the legislative branch are competing for superiority, as if they want to be the only branch of our government, right? That they're constantly trying to be like, you know what, we're going to let the governor appoint all the judges, or we're going to pass laws and put language in there that says you can't even challenge them. I'm like, well, that's the explicit opposite of separation of powers and how our founding fathers designed our system.
Well, and what is so, you know, what is so frustrating? I mean, it's not the only thing that's frustrating, but like you asked Senator Treat. I mean, I didn't ask Senator Treat because he won't talk to me, but somebody asked Senator Treat about his, SJR 43, right? That wanted to remake the judiciary in Oklahoma. And he was very explicit, right? He wasn't saying we have unqualified judges. He wasn't saying that they weren't interpreting the law correctly. He wasn't saying that there was something intrinsically wrong with the process. He was very explicit. He said this is about making sure there are judges on the Supreme Court of the state of Oklahoma who will support any of the abortion restrictions that we pass, right? That's not an exact quote, but that's essentially what he said. Has nothing to do with interpreting the law, right? Mm-hmm. It seems like they are less and less. They care less and less about whether something is actually consistent with the law. What they care about is judges who will say that it is, regardless of what the text of the law actually says, right? Yeah. And that's really, really scary because it's, you made the point that's lack of access to the courts. But I would even say they don't care if we have access to the courts or if someone has access to the courts. They just care that they know what the outcome is going to be, no matter how many lawsuits there are. Right. Like they are trying to adjudicate the outcome of these lawsuits. Right. No matter what the legal arguments are. And that's terrifying stuff, man. That is what authoritarian governments do. That's I'm not sure if that's the literal definition of a kangaroo court, but I think it's pretty close. Right. I mean, that's what's that's what's terrifying, right? I mean, I'll just put it like this. I texted Andy about this earlier. Earlier today. I got a text earlier today from a person who previously has been a Republican congressional staffer. They're not now, but a former Republican congressional staffer who now lives in Illinois texted me earlier today and was like, dude, what the hell's in the water in Oklahoma? Mm-hmm. What's going on down there? And I was like, bro, you don't even know. You've been in that, you've lived in that world and you don't even know. Right. It's anyway. Sorry, that was a little bit of
and the other piece to relate it to what you're saying, Scott, is the fact that in addition to ensure that this viewpoint stands, even if it is, challenged in the legal system, you also are bucking against even what the people want. So some of our members of the press have been lifting up polling data and information that signals that a majority of Oklahomans don't want a full abortion ban, or even how far many of our pieces of policy have shifted. And so I even wonder what really is the root of going as extreme as we have and getting to this point, especially. And it clearly isn't appealing to the base in Oklahoma, because the base in Oklahoma is signaling, not even that far. But are there national aspirations, or is this a way to say, we talk about the concept of being in the top 10 and being, number one in this. Is this an area that can be bolstered as Oklahoma has gone the farthest in this area? So it's really concerning, to the point that you lifted, Scott, that there's so many efforts in place to try to make this enshrined, but also for the fact that it doesn't even line with true Oklahoma values.
I think that's such a strong point, Bailey. And what we know is, though, we had seen several states do Texas-style bills, but none of them went. I mean, several southern states, several very conservative states, but many of them did not like this private right to action. They thought many conservative Republicans, legislatures did not like the private right to action because they're thinking long term of what else. In California, we've seen Governor Newsom using that same language against gun manufacturers. And so I think that is such a great point, is that there's no alignment with Oklahoma. We're seeing polling, recent Planned Parenthood, I was with Planned Parenthood for 9 years prior to coming to ACLU. And we did when we thought we were going to see a constitutional amendment, we did some polling. And that was that was early 2020, right? So what Roe wasn't on the top of people's brains and forefront the way it is now because of what could happen in June. But even then, people were like, no, we thought we had a pathway to victory. And so I think that really goes to show there is unalignment right now. Governor Stitt was recently on Fox News. I don't know if you all had that chance to see that. Horrible. He did such a horrible job talking about compassion, but could not answer some of the questions of the Fox News reporter when it came to the statistics of women in Oklahoma. And he was saying, well, he represents all of Oklahomans, and Oklahomans don't want that. Well, he clearly knows that's not the case. So what is it? What truly is it? And then, but it doesn't matter because the impact is real. Like the impact is that Oklahoma providers stopped performing abortions last week because of the emergency clause. They were scared that they were going to be in the middle of a procedure, and he signed it. And then what happens now? And then more importantly, the idea that Oklahomans have less rights than their neighbors across the country. And that means something. Right to abortion is a fundamental right as of right now. And the fact that we do
or
not...
just the idea of this populous state that we live in, and the irony that we have less rights than other places
than our neighboring states, like that should be concerning to all of us.
I mean, that Fox News interview that you referenced to Maya, man, that was something. Him trying to explain that, and Bailey, didn't somebody once say that in politics, if you're explaining, you're losing? Didn't somebody say that?
Yeah.
Wasn't that? I think the governor's professional tweeter tweeted that out a few weeks ago about how in politics, if you're explaining, you're losing, and they've been doing a lot of explaining lately.
I saw that interview as well. It was super. It was just a super interview. It was really super, you guys.
Super.
You should definitely go watch it. Super interview.
Super.
All right. Let's do the last of these bills, and that was Senate Bill 1555.
Mm-hmm. So Senate Bill 1555 is what was an amendment, or it wasn't an amendment, but it was trying to clean up language from Senate Bill 918 from last session. And what we call these are trigger laws. And trigger laws are new to the abortion ecosystem. And essentially what they are saying is that if or when, and it's probably when now, that Roe is overturned, so the Supreme Court case that gave the right to an abortion back in the 73, like when Roe is overturned, then automatically all of our pre-Roe laws are going to revive themselves. And our pre-Roe laws are from the 20s. So, almost 100 years old, essentially outlawing an abortion. But in the midst of it all, when they did this last session, again, it's just really bad and poor if there was any teachers out there. Like they did not double check their work, because in last session when they did it, when they created this trigger law, they got rid of all of their anti-abortion bill laws that are currently law. It got rid of everything. So they came back with 1555 and they said, yes, we're going to revive all of the pre-Roe laws, but we're also going to make sure that all of our anti-abortion laws that are extremely restrictive now are still in place. So 20-week ban, 72-hour waiting period, must be done in a clinical hospital. So like all of that. So 1555, we just said is like our trigger law, kind of our trigger law plus. Does not go into effect until or unless Roe is overturned.
So this is a question that I've had actually, and we've gotten to some of it with the differences in the language and the two bounty laws, and but you talk about, okay, so there's the two bounty laws and they have kind of, different language in terms of like legal mechanisms and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Then you have the 6-week ban, the so-called heartbeat law. Now you've got this extra law that like basically says, yeah, like our trigger law. Is it like okay, we're going to make abortion extra, extra, extra illegal. Like abortion is like super duper illegal. Like, is this, I mean, are they just trying to make themselves feel better by saying we've passed more anti-abortion laws than anyone else, right? Like if your goal is to make as certain as possible that there is no access to legal abortion in Oklahoma, do you actually need all of this, or are they just being like super redundant because either they're looking for political points or they're stupid or both?
Right. I think such a great point, because you can't even write this session alone. Forget about bills that have been passed before. This session alone, these bills are conflicting with each other. Like, how do you pass a 6-week ban and then you have a total fertilization ban, and then you have a criminalization ban with no rape or incest? And that's the other part of it, is like, so 1503, the 6-week ban, doesn't have a rape or incest exception, but 4327 does. So if these pre-Roe laws are resurrected, does the rape and incest exception still exist? Does the exception for saving the life of the mother still exist? Does the exception for ectopic pregnancy still exist? We just don't know, because nowhere in any area of law do we have bills by the same party in the same session so conflicting with each other that they can't come. I mean, that's the whole purpose of conference committees. Like, I've been a lobbyist for so long, right? When you can't figure out and you have bills that are conflicting with each other, wait and come together. So it was the political points, is what I have to say. It's like the political points. We've got to put this on a walk card. We got to make sure that we're talking about this in the next commercial, but truly completely dismissing and disregarding the impact it has on Oklahomans' everyday lives, and that should be offensive to all of us.
I mean, and it is, but there's also like completely just, and this is like, like the like political like hack, like forget about the like terrible real impact, but just like the politics of it. Like if you're creating more problems for yourself, right? Right? Like you're so focused on passing as many anti-abortion bills as possible, you're opening yourself up to all kinds of additional, right, like legal challenges and paperwork, like, right, like it. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and I probably wouldn't be a good one if I was.
The
But
money,
it seems
Scott,
like
the amount of money that's going to be spent on trying to fight these things, or get clarification from the confusion, right? From the lens of the taxpayers to the advocates challenging the laws. Like, that's money that could have been spent in so many other places.
Well, and that's the deal, right? Is that it's Scott, it's not the lawmakers that are held responsible for this. How many of these folks are going to be termed out? All the leadership will be termed out in 2 years, right? And so they're not going to be around by the time this stuff gets heard, to be responsible. But Bailey's point is well made. It's on us. Like, we're the ones footing the bill for this stuff. To say nothing about the personal impact of these laws on women and the whole community, right? Like, there's a lot to it. So, Tamaya, I'm glad you brought up the conflict between the bills. That was actually going to be my question: is surely they don't all mesh together collaboratively, like in a good way, that there's going to be issues that have to be adjudicated at some point. And so there was a lawsuit filed recently challenging two of these bills, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Correct. So we are so grateful for organizations like the Center for Reproductive Rights, which is a national organization based out of New York City, and they are the experts on these anti-abortion bills. They had, because Oklahoma was just for decades, seeing so many anti-abortion bills, they have taken a specific interest. So since about 2000, mid 2000s, they have been the entity filing these lawsuits. So once again, they came in and super successful, right? They have like a 99% success rate. And they graciously, we've been working, and when I say we, collectively as repro justice activists, been working with them since the beginning of session, because we've been anticipating these bills. And they filed a lawsuit, the first lawsuit on April 28th, against Senate Bill 1503. And really focusing, we filed our cases in state court. A lot of the times we've seen these kind of play out in federal court. That's how we got to, the Mississippi case at the Supreme Court. But they recognized early on that the Oklahoma's constitution is actually broader than our federal constitution. So we think we actually have more protections in our state constitution. So since about the 2000s, they've been really filing their cases successfully in state court. And so they filed 1503 and really focusing on many more than just, Roe is still law of the land, whether it's for a couple more weeks or maybe forever. We could talk about what my thinking is on how that's going to play out later. But, so really challenging just access to abortion, but really, really focusing hard on this access to courts. We as folks living in Oklahoma, as citizens, as people, should have as much access to the courts as we can. And the fact that this denies it, they're really focusing there. And that is why I think a lot of, regardless of where people sit ideologically, should be supporting this lawsuit because of the access to court part. So because that lawsuit, because because Senate Bill 1503, the 6-week ban is very similar to the total abortion ban 4327, they simply amended their lawsuit to include 4327. And they did that yesterday. And we have a hearing on June 1st. So they will argue in front of the Oklahoma Supreme. I don't think it's the full court, but they will be arguing their case, our case then. And I serve as a plaintiff in that case because, again, I chair the Oklahoma Call for Reproductive Justice. I serve as a plaintiff, and we're really excited. Like, it's a long shot because they could simply just wait until see what happens with the Dobbs case. But we truly believe that we demand access to safe and legal abortions in Oklahoma. People should not have to travel hundreds of miles away, or people should not be forced into pregnancies that they don't want or can't have.
Tamya, thank you so much for being here today to talk about all of this. You really explained it in ways that even the three of us with our massive minds, I'm kidding, but that we couldn't. And I think on behalf of our listeners, we appreciate your hard work that you do both at the ACLU and at the Oklahoma Call for Reproductive Justice. It means a lot to thousands of people every day. So we appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, before we go, we want to take a few minutes to kind of give I'll say a brief lay of the land for what's happened in the past week at the state legislature, with the caveat that things are still happening. So as of this moment that we're recording at 4:00 on Friday, the House is adjourned sine die. I don't think the Senate has. Speaker McCall is having a press conference in about 30 minutes. And so what like anything, if there's one thing we can count on, it's change. And they're still in special session, and there's another special session happening in 2 weeks, 2 weeks. And so lots evolving. As we knew, I think since our last episode, last Friday, the legislature passed the budget, the general appropriations bills, and all the other funding bills that go along with it. They sent them to the governor. He had 5 days to act. That ended yesterday, Thursday at 5 p.m. And so he held a press conference yesterday, which involved the word mayonnaise. I know that I've highlighted that a few times, but that is an offensive condiment to me. And it just was a weird thing to throw out there. And it came back up today.
What?
On the House
Whoa.
Do you know about this?
What is this about mayonnaise being offensive to you?
Yeah, I'm not a big mayonnaise fan.
Have you ever had mayonnaise?
I'm not a mayonnaise person either. I'll eat it in potato salad, but that's about it.
Yeah, I know people try to rebrand it as aioli, but that's not.
No. Have you had like real mayonnaise, or have you just had that crap that comes in a jar from the grocery store that tastes like garbage?
Both garbages. I'm just not a mayonnaise fan. I'm a mustard guy.
I mean, same. Love me some mustard, but like good homemade mayonnaise is one of the best things in the entire world.
Bailey's gagging.
Oh, Bailey, I'm gonna make some homemade mayonnaise.
Maybe I just haven't had the right mayonnaise. So
we're gonna put it.
I need to have an open mind to try it.
We're gonna put it on a sandwich, and it is gonna change your life.
Bailey says, "No mayonnaise will be the right mayonnaise, Scott."
Anyway, what was it about mayonnaise? I missed the mayonnaise reference. I was so fixated on being offended that you hate mayonnaise.
No, the governor said something to the effect of about the ARPA money, and that he didn't want it to go to pet projects. He didn't want it to be spread like mayonnaise over the whole state. And so today, Representative Ryan Martinez brought a bottle of mayonnaise with him to the House floor on his desk.
Was this before?
Ooh, he's on one then.
Was that before or after Representative Martinez called the governor a racist?
Yeah. Well, to be clear, he called his comments racist. He didn't say Governor Stitt is a racist. He said Governor Stitt's like racist and divisive comments or something like that about tribes.
No, it was related to there was a bill on related to
driver's
licenses and tribal nations
mm-hmm.
that the governor vetoed before
mm-hmm.
that they brought back to override.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they overrode that veto today, along with a bunch of others. And I've started making a list, but we're waiting for the Senate to adjourn sine die. So we'll see exactly what all that looks like, and probably talk about that more next week with a full breakdown. But essentially, at the press conference yesterday, Bailey, did you watch it? Do you want to tell us what the governor said?
So, in short, there's concern about the budget bill because the governor line item vetoed the budget, first of all, because there's concern of, at the root of it, the type of tax cuts that have been taken, right? And some of the ways that the legislature is spending its money. From the governor's perspective, the legislature shouldn't be giving money to fund private prisons, and they shouldn't be taking away a vehicle tax, right, when they could be doing things that would help the people in his perspective, right? And from his lens of helping the people, it's eliminating the grocery sales tax. It's providing more relief through the income tax. And so he wanted the legislature to swap out. So he vetoed those specific areas of the budget where there would have been revenue taken away, to basically swap it for those other areas for the way that he wants to frame relief. Because, for example, another bill that he vetoed was the income tax rebate that was supposed to go out to families in December. That would have been a $75 check for individuals and $125 check for married couples. But he said that that's not real tax relief, and he wants to have another conversation about tax relief. So he called also, in addition to those line item vetoes, he called his own special session, in addition to the special session that the legislature called to address ARPA, to do two things. To, one, address ARPA funding, and then also to figure out ways to provide relief through elimination of the grocery sales tax, whether it's temporary or whether it's permanent. So he wants to bring back the legislature on June 13th. And there's a lot of mixed feelings about all of those things.
And we've learned more about those feelings today. And I want to clarify one thing. The governor didn't actually do everything that he said he was going to do yesterday. Like, he said he was going to veto some of those line items in the general appropriations bill, but he didn't do it today. The general appropriations bill, he didn't do it yesterday, and so he also didn't sign it, which means the bill just takes effect without his signature. But by not vetoing those things, that money is still appropriated the way the legislature wanted it to be. Today, the legislature overturned or overrode a bunch of his vetoes. Some of them, even one of them from last year, right? There was a veto he had last year that came back up, or that they brought back up so they could veto it. They could override it. They overrode the veto about executive branch cabinet members making financial disclosures in the same way the governor and the legislature has to. He had vetoed that. There was a lot of hoopla about that, particularly as it's come out about Education Secretary Ryan Walters and how much money he receives from um, school choice groups and kind of all of this. And so there was a lot of message signaling today the legislature's displeasure with the governor. And I think that we've seen in the last hour some fissures between the House and Senate, right? On things like tax rebates. So the governor wants to be the one to, give people money. The legislature was at first, but now it sounds like at least between the House and the governor, there may be some alignment as they go into this special session. And that means
Well, and Andy, to your point, right, about how things are going to change, there's going to be a press conference in the next 15 minutes. So whenever we wrap up our time on the pod this week, there'll be new information of perspective from the Speaker of the House, Charles McCall, right? So we'll see even this afternoon where the House stands on the things that have transpired.
So y'all know, because we do this every week. Y'all know I'm not a very smart man. Okay, there's things I know and there's things I don't know. But the way I understand it is that the governor stood up yesterday and said that because of Joe Biden and the Biden administration, we have rampant inflation because the government has given everybody too much money, right? And that this out of control.
There was a picture during the press conference comparing certain food items that have hit 12, 13, 14% of inflation rates.
So there's this out of control inflation because the government has given everybody too much money, right? And Governor Stitt's solution is for the government of the state of Oklahoma to give everyone even more money. Right? Am I getting that right?
Yes.
There's good money and there's bad money. There's good money and bad government money.
So when
Joe Biden money is bad, the Kevin Stitt money though is good and delicious.
So when Governor Stitt wants to pass a tax cut, so people have more money to spend on things, that doesn't cause inflation. But when the federal government does it, that does cause inflation. That seems to be the argument, which does not make a ton of sense to me. The other thing is, it's, all like kidding aside, like it's bad economic policy. You can actually make I think you can make a fairly compelling case that if you were going to give like targeted tax credits to the manufacturing sector in an effort to like close the supply gap and increase production to that would actually reduce inflationary pressure because it would bring more goods to markets. There'd be less competition for those goods, so prices would come down. But individual tax cuts and rebates to individual taxpayers is probably not the way to do that, particularly when we're at a time of record inflation, which probably is due in part to the COVID stimulus packages that were passed during the Trump and Biden administrations, as well as the economic rebound that's happened as we're coming out of the pandemic and people are spending money that they saved for the last couple of years. So there's myriad causes, but it seems, I think a lot of economists do seem to agree that one big problem, there is just a lot of money in the economy right now, and it's burning really, really hot, and giving people tax cuts is just going to make that worse.
Scott, so you mean to tell me Trump money is good, Biden money is bad?
But Stitt money is good.
Stitt money is good too.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That's exactly what it is. So that's one thing. The other thing is I don't know. I mean, I don't know this is even going to happen, right? He's calling them back for a special session. We've talked about special sessions before here on the pod. They don't have to do anything. They can literally gavel in and gavel out. We just saw, there's some sputter on Twitter about how the House, like you said, Andy, may be gearing up to engage. I think McCall said we're ready to roll up our sleeves on tax cuts. He actually said tax reform, but it's not reform; it's just cutting taxes. But I mean, again, y'all jump in here and tell me if I'm wrong, but the place where tax cuts have died the last 2 sessions has not been the House; it's been the Senate, right? It has been Senator Thompson and Senator Treat who have been reluctant to engage on further tax cuts. And while the governor may want the tax cuts a lot, and while Speaker McCall may want the tax cuts a lot, hint, hint, because they're both rich, while they may want the tax cuts a lot, I don't get the feeling that Senator Treat is in a mood to do any huge favors for the governor, or for Speaker McCall, I should say. There is I mean, I don't, I'm not in the room between those two, but I think there is a lot of bad blood right now between the House and the Senate because of failure of the House to advance education vouchers that Senator Treat was very passionately putting forward this session. And I think there's also some bad blood about SJR 43. So, it's not very often that you see the Senate pro tems 2 signature issues go down in a single legislative session. And so I don't know. We'll see what happens on June 13th or 16th or whatever it is when he's called it back into a special session. But to me, it is not clear that there's going to be a ton of action on taxes.
Yeah. I imagine they'll do something. As we like to joke, there's no relief like tax relief, and that's what these folks definitely think as well. And as we wind down, I'm going to highlight one last ridiculous statement that came from the legislature today. Non-doc, I think Trace was the one that first shared this before I even saw it in my inbox. But it's a statement from a number of state senators and representatives, and just the title alone made me spit out my coffee. But it says, statement, legislative Republicans comment on tax credits and woke ideology. Just essentially, it's a bunch of folks who don't want Panasonic to come here and take our money and build a battery factory because Panasonic supports, as they phrase it, activism and advocacy specifically in support of LGBTQ plus communities. And I was like, this is just a bananas time to be alive, right? Like, that's Bailey's rubbing her temples. All right, well, we'll end on that. I'm not even going to go through it. It's exactly who you'd expect, and it's a statement. It has no bearing for anything.
But listeners, if you leave with anything, remember, it's sine die, but things aren't finished yet. So we're going to have a lot of stuff to talk about over the next few months at the very least.
Well, because we have special session. That's right. I mean, it just keeps going. Does the fun ever stop? That's the truth there. Bailey, thank you for being here today.
Of course. Thank you, Andy.
Scott, thanks for being here too, man. He doesn't even look up from scrolling on his phone.
Appreciate it.
You looking up mayonnaise recipes there? Is that what's happening?
No, not yet.
Listeners, thank you for being here as well. That brings us to the end of this episode. Stay tuned. Come back next week. Listen, as we'll have probably the first of several episodes that are more of a recap of this legislative session. There were roughly 400-ish, 434 measures that were sent to the governor this year. They weren't all signed. We're not going to do a summary of all of them, but we will try to give you a better picture on where things ended up and where they may be going over the summer. As a reminder, the deadline to register to vote or to update your registration for the June primary is next Friday. It's June 3rd. So if you've moved recently or if you haven't registered and you're somehow listening to this podcast and still haven't done it, please go do it. You can go to the election board website and print off a voter registration form. You can go to any tag agency. Some libraries have it. Your county election board has them.
Register. Or even when you go register to, change your license or whatever, they'll have them there too.
That's right. Yeah, every tag agency has them. And while you're at it, ask somebody else. Ask your friends, your family, your neighbors. You don't have to push any policy on them. Just ask them, hey, are you registered to vote? Do you know there's a primary election this month on June 23rd, I think, right? So Keep that in mind. When is the election this month? Is it 23rd?
20. It's the 28th.
8th. Okay. So tell them, hey, do you know there's an election on June 28th? You should vote. We should all vote. All right. Well, that brings us to the end. Don't forget, decisions are made by those who show up. We'll see you next week.